Sarah had always been proud of her sharp memory. It was one of the qualities she cherished most about herself. She could recall the name of her first-grade teacher, the exact day she met her best friend, and even the phone number of her childhood home, which had been disconnected for over 2 decades. But when she hit 50, something started to change. At first, it was small, misplacing her keys or forgetting where she put her phone. Then it became more frequent. She found herself walking into a room and forgetting why she went there, or struggling to remember the names of acquaintances she hadn't seen in a while. It wasn't long before the nagging thought crept into her mind. Am I losing my memory? The thought scared her more than anything. Her mother, a woman now in her late 70s, had been dealing with memory problems for years. Sarah had watched her mom go through the difficult transition of forgetting simple things, like where she left her glasses or the names of people she used to know. And then, one day, her mom couldn't remember Sarah's name. It was a heartbreak that Sarah still hadn't gotten over. As her 50th birthday passed, the anxiety grew. She began to avoid situations where she had to remember new names, dates, or details. She found herself becoming more and more withdrawn, increasingly afraid that her own mind was starting to slip away, just like her mother's had. Conversations with friends became stressful. She was terrified of forgetting something important in a casual chat. Her thoughts were constantly consumed by the idea that she was losing control over her own mind. It was during one of these anxious episodes that she made an appointment with her doctor. Sarah was convinced that the forgetfulness she was experiencing was the early signs of Alzheimer's or some other form of dementia. She couldn't bear the thought of following the same trajectory as her mother, who had been diagnosed with early-onset Alzheimer's just a few years earlier. The doctor listened carefully to Sarah's concerns and assured her that forgetfulness didn't necessarily equate to a serious cognitive decline. Memory problems can happen as we age, but that doesn't mean you're losing your mind, the doctor explained, a warm and reassuring smile on his face. Sarah felt some relief, but the fear still lingered. It wasn't until a few weeks later that her perception of aging and memory loss began to shift dramatically. She was talking with a friend, Joan, who was in her early 60s. Joan, a retired school teacher, had always been a vibrant, energetic woman. Sarah had known Joan for years, but she was still shocked when she casually mentioned, I've been taking these memory exercises every day. I think they really help. Sarah raised an eyebrow. Memory exercises? She asked, intrigued. Joan nodded. Yeah, puzzles, word games, that kind of stuff. It's proven to help with mental sharpness, especially as you get older. I've been doing them for a couple of months, and I feel like I'm remembering things better than I used to. It's pretty amazing. This caught Sarah off guard. She had always believed that as you age, your brain inevitably slows down. She assumed that memory loss was a natural part of getting older. It was one of the many facts that society drilled into her growing up. But here was Joan, older than Sarah, actively working on her memory and feeling positive results. Sarah's curiosity was piqued, and she decided to look into it. She spent the next few days reading articles and watching videos about aging and cognitive health. One thing that stood out to her was the concept of neuroplasticity, the brain's ability to reorganize itself by forming new neural connections throughout life. This meant that even as she aged, her brain could adapt, learn new things, and strengthen existing skills. The notion that memory loss was a natural, unavoidable aspect of aging began to feel less like an inescapable fate and more like a myth that had been perpetuated over time. She discovered that, while some degree of cognitive slowing is a normal part of the aging process, it doesn't have to result in memory loss. In fact, studies showed that regular mental stimulation could actually improve memory function. The more you engage in activities that challenge your brain, the better your memory could remain. This wasn't just about doing crossword puzzles. Though those helped, it was about keeping your brain active with a variety of tasks. Learning a new language, picking up a musical instrument, reading new genres of books, or even engaging in conversations that require problem-solving were all ways to keep the brain sharp. Sarah felt a sense of hope she hadn't experienced in months. This didn't mean she would never experience forgetfulness, but it did mean she didn't have to be a passive observer in the decline of her mental sharpness. She could actively work to maintain it, just as she worked to keep her body healthy through exercise. It felt empowering to learn that memory loss wasn't an unavoidable consequence of aging, but rather something that could be influenced by how she chose to engage with her mind. Her journey of discovery didn't stop with reading articles. Sarah decided to try incorporating some of the mental exercises into her daily life. She downloaded a brain training app that offered daily puzzles, quizzes, and memory challenges. At first, the exercises felt like a chore. She was so used to working her body at the gym, but working her brain felt strange. But she persevered, and over time, she began to see improvement. She noticed that she could focus better and was quicker to recall names and facts that had previously slipped her mind. She also made a habit of reading more, this time not just novels, but also nonfiction books on subjects she was unfamiliar with. The more she stretched her mental muscles, the better she felt. Months passed, and Sarah continued to make brain health a priority. She also started attending a local seminar on cognitive wellness, where she learned about the importance of sleep, nutrition, and stress management in maintaining a healthy brain. The speakers at the seminar emphasized that sleep deprivation, poor eating habits, and chronic stress could all contribute to cognitive decline. Sarah was surprised to learn how much sleep played a role in memory consolidation. It wasn't just about the hours spent in bed, but the quality of sleep that mattered. When she made these lifestyle changes, getting more restful sleep, eating brain-boosting foods, and finding healthier ways to manage stress, she began to feel a noticeable difference. Her anxiety around memory loss started to fade. One day, she was having lunch with Joan again, and they casually chatted about their experiences with memory exercises. Sarah shared how much better she had been feeling, and Joan was excited to hear it. "It's amazing what we can do when we take our mental health into our own hands," Joan said with a grin. Sarah smiled, realizing how much her mindset had shifted. She no longer feared losing her memory. Instead, she felt a sense of control over her cognitive health, knowing that with the right practices, she could maintain her mental sharpness. She now understood that the idea that memory loss was inevitable with aging was a myth, one that she had accepted without question. But now, she was actively breaking that myth down, one memory exercise at a time. Her journey wasn't just about preserving her memory. It was about reclaiming her confidence. She had spent so many years fearing the loss of her mind, but now she realized that she could be proactive, informed, and resilient. Aging no longer felt like an inevitable decline, but rather an opportunity for growth, exploration, and self-improvement. Sarah wasn't just aging. She was evolving. Mark had always been athletic. From a young age, sports had been the center of his life. As a teenager, he was the captain of his high school soccer team, and through his 20s and 30s, he remained a regular at the gym. His physical fitness was something he took pride in, something that grounded him. But when Mark turned 45, things started to change. He began feeling persistent aches in his knees and lower back. At first, he brushed it off, telling himself it was just a sign of getting older. However, over the next few years, the discomfort only worsened, and it started to affect his ability to work out the way he used to. His usual routine, which had once been filled with intense cardio and weightlifting, became harder to manage. Every morning, he woke up with stiff joints, and by mid-afternoon, his muscles felt tight and sore. At first, he ignored these signs, trying to push through the pain. He'd tell himself that it was normal, part of aging. After all, everyone said that as you got older, your body slowed down. In conversations with friends, Mark had heard countless times that aging meant giving up on the physical activities you once enjoyed. It was almost like a rite of passage. The idea that aging meant physical decline seemed to be universally accepted. People in their 50s and 60s were supposed to slow down, limit their physical activity, and accept that they were no longer in their prime. Mark was starting to buy into this narrative, albeit reluctantly. He began cutting back on his gym visits, opting for shorter, less intense workouts. His gym time became more about maintaining the bare minimum of fitness than pushing himself to improve. Even though he was still lifting weights and doing light cardio, it didn't feel the same. The joy he once felt after a great workout was replaced by a sense of dread. The gym, which had once been his sanctuary, now felt like a place where he was just going through the motions. It wasn't long before Mark found himself making excuses to skip his workouts entirely. He began to rationalize that, at his age, he didn't need to be in peak physical condition anymore. Instead, he focused on his career and family. He convinced himself that his days of pushing his body to the limit were over. There were days when he'd sit on the couch, scrolling through social media, seeing his friends post pictures of their vacations or weekend hikes, and he'd tell himself that it was okay to relax and take it easy. After all, what was the point of working out so hard at his age? But despite these justifications, Mark couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. He had always been active and healthy, and now he was watching his physical fitness decline, even though he was still relatively young. The truth was, he didn't want to accept that he was becoming sedentary. He had always prided himself on being in control of his health, and giving that up felt like surrendering a part of himself. The turning point came when Mark met his neighbor, Arthur, who was in his 60s. Arthur was an anomaly in Mark's mind. He was lean, muscular, and active, everything Mark had once been. On a sunny afternoon, Mark was out in his yard when he saw Arthur jogging past his house. Surprised, Mark called out to him. "Arthur, you're still running?" he asked. Arthur slowed down and stopped in front of Mark's yard. He wiped his brow and smiled. "Oh yeah, I run every day. It's the best way to stay young, you know." Mark laughed nervously, half joking. "I don't know if my body could handle that anymore. I've been dealing with some back pain and knee issues. I'm just not sure I can keep up." Arthur shook his head and motioned for Mark to join him. "Listen, I get it. As you age, things change, but you don't have to stop moving. You just have to adapt. I used to run marathons in my 40s, but now I focus on low-impact cardio and strength training. My knees don't hurt anymore, and I feel stronger than I did 10 years ago." Mark was intrigued. He had always admired Arthur's energy and vitality. The idea that you could stay fit and active well into your 60s seemed almost impossible to him. But here was Arthur, living proof that it could be done. "What kind of exercises do you do?" Mark asked. Arthur smiled knowingly. "I focus on things like swimming, cycling, yoga, and resistance training. The key is to listen to your body. If something hurts, modify it. You can still push yourself without doing damage. It's all about consistency and making smart choices." Mark was skeptical, but he decided to give it a try. The next day, he dusted off his gym bag and headed to the local pool for a swim. At first, the water felt cold, and he was out of breath much quicker than he had anticipated. But as he swam lap after lap, he began to feel a sense of freedom he hadn't experienced in years. His joints, which had been sore from years of running and weightlifting, felt lighter in the water. By the end of his swim, Mark was exhausted but exhilarated. He had forgotten how good it felt to push his body in new ways. Over the next few weeks, Mark took Arthur's advice to heart. He started swimming 3 times a week, gradually building his endurance. He also incorporated yoga into his routine, focusing on stretches that helped release the tension in his back and knees. Although he still did some weightlifting, he cut back on the intensity and started using machines that allowed him to target specific muscles without overloading his joints. The changes weren't immediate, but after a few months, Mark began to notice a significant difference. His back pain started to subside, and his knees didn't ache as much after a workout. He felt stronger and more flexible than he had in years. His endurance improved, and he found that he could do activities that had once been off-limits to him. He even started going on long walks with his wife, enjoying the beauty of nature without feeling out of breath. Mark also began to realize that the myth of aging and physical decline was just that, a myth. The idea that older adults should simply accept being less fit and less active was rooted in outdated assumptions about aging. As he delved deeper into research about aging and fitness, he discovered that staying active wasn't just possible in his 50s and 60s. It was crucial for maintaining good health. Regular exercise helped improve cardiovascular health, increase bone density, reduce stress, and even enhance mental clarity. It was no longer about trying to maintain the same fitness level he had in his 30s. It was about maintaining a level of activity that worked for his body, allowing him to continue living a fulfilling life. One day, as he finished a swim, Mark ran into Arthur again. The two of them chatted for a while, discussing their favorite workouts and how they were feeling. Mark smiled as he realized how much his perspective had shifted. "You were right, Arthur," he said. "It's not about pushing yourself to the limit. It's about staying consistent and adapting to what your body needs." Arthur nodded. "Exactly. Age isn't a barrier. It's an opportunity to evolve. You don't need to stop moving. You just have to find what works for you." Mark walked home that afternoon with a sense of satisfaction he hadn't felt in a long time. He realized that aging didn't have to mean giving up on physical fitness. It didn't mean he had to surrender to the idea of inevitable decline. Instead, it meant making smarter choices, listening to his body, and adapting his approach to fitness. With each passing day, Mark felt stronger, healthier, and more in control of his physical well-being. Aging had, in fact, become an opportunity for growth, an opportunity to redefine what it meant to be fit at any age. Jessica had always taken pride in her appearance. She wasn't obsessive about it, but she did enjoy the occasional pampering session, whether it was a facial at the spa or a trip to the dermatologist for advice on skincare. Throughout her 20s and 30s, she was often complimented on her youthful complexion, which she maintained with an elaborate skincare routine. She diligently followed the advice of experts, using high-end moisturizers and serums, always remembering to apply sunscreen, even on overcast days. Her skin was smooth, even-toned, and seemed to defy the inevitable signs of aging. For a long time, Jessica believed she had a secret weapon against aging, something that many women could only dream of: genes that gifted her flawless skin. But when Jessica hit 40, things started to change. It wasn't drastic at first. She noticed a faint line near her eyes, a subtle reminder of the many smiles and squints from years of enjoying the outdoors. Then, one day, she noticed something more noticeable, a wrinkle on her forehead that wasn't going away. She tried to smooth it out with her hands, but it stayed put, stubbornly etched into her skin. She immediately felt the familiar pang of anxiety that always accompanied the thought of aging. The media, celebrities, and even friends would often talk about the inevitability of wrinkles, the loss of youthful plumpness, and sagging skin. There were countless advertisements promising that one could turn back the clock on skin, but deep down, Jessica knew that she wasn't immune to the passage of time. At first, she was pragmatic about it. "It's just a wrinkle," she told herself. "Everyone gets them. It's part of life." But soon, the subtle changes in her skin began to feel more significant. Her once smooth jawline began to lose its definition, and the skin around her cheeks started to sag ever so slightly. Despite her best efforts with moisturizing and anti-aging creams, the changes were undeniable. Her skin didn't look as radiant as it used to, and it seemed to lose its firmness more each day. The words aging and wrinkles kept swirling in her mind, making her feel like a chapter of her life had closed, one she wasn't ready to face. Jessica decided to do what many people in her situation did: seek solutions. She began to explore the world of anti-aging treatments more seriously. She'd always been cautious about invasive procedures, but the idea of keeping her youthful appearance was too tempting to resist. She consulted with a dermatologist who recommended Botox injections to smooth out the fine lines around her eyes and forehead. It seemed like a simple, quick solution, so she booked an appointment. After the procedure, she was thrilled to see immediate results. The wrinkles around her eyes disappeared, and her skin looked refreshed and smooth. It was like a breath of relief, a temporary fix, but a fix nonetheless. However, as the months passed, Jessica began to feel a sense of dissatisfaction with her decision. She had gone back for additional treatments to maintain the effect, but something was starting to feel off. Her face didn't move the same way anymore. She had always prided herself on being expressive, especially when laughing or making animated gestures in conversation. But now, it felt as though her emotions were muted, her face frozen in a way that made her feel less authentic. The more she relied on these treatments, the more disconnected she felt from her own natural appearance. She was beginning to wonder whether she was chasing something that wasn't meant to be preserved forever. Despite the initial satisfaction of smoother skin, Jessica started feeling trapped in a cycle of treatments. Every few months, the effects would wear off, and she'd have to return for another round. It wasn't just the money, it was the emotional toll of constantly worrying about her appearance. Every line, every sag, every wrinkle became something to fix rather than accept. She knew this wasn't the kind of life she wanted to lead, constantly obsessing over her looks and spending money to maintain a youth that was destined to fade. It was at this point that Jessica had a conversation with her close friend, Claire, who was in her mid-50s. Claire was a successful artist, known not only for her talent, but also for her radiant presence. She was one of those women who seemed to age gracefully, exuding confidence and comfort in her own skin. Claire had always been candid about the realities of aging, and over lunch one afternoon, she noticed Jessica's discomfort with her own appearance. "You've been getting a lot of work done lately," Claire remarked, looking at her with a knowing gaze. Jessica sighed, pushing her salad around on her plate. "I know. It's just, I can't seem to get it right. The wrinkles, the sagging skin. I feel like I'm fighting a losing battle." Claire smiled softly, but there was no judgment in her expression, only empathy. "I get it. I've been there. I used to feel the same way, thinking that every line and every wrinkle was a defeat. But, I've come to realize something important." Jessica looked up, interested. "What's that?" "It's not about fixing what's happening to your skin. It's about learning to love the skin you're in, even as it changes. Wrinkles aren't something to fear. They're a sign of life lived. They're reminders of the joy, laughter, and moments that have shaped who you are. Your face tells a story, Jess, and the more you fight it, the more disconnected you become from yourself." Jessica was silent for a moment, considering Claire's words. It wasn't that she didn't appreciate her friend's perspective. Quite the opposite. Claire had always been someone Jessica admired for her natural beauty and confidence. But it felt difficult to embrace the idea of aging gracefully when every ad and magazine cover told her the opposite. That aging was something to hide, to erase, to fear. "I don't know if I can do that," Jessica admitted, her voice tinged with uncertainty. "It's hard not to compare myself to others. I see all these young women with perfect skin, and I just feel invisible." Claire nodded, understanding. "I get it. We're constantly bombarded with these unrealistic beauty standards. But what I've realized is that beauty isn't just about how smooth your skin is or how firm your jawline is. Beauty is about your energy, your smile, how you carry yourself. It's about how you feel in your own skin, not how others see you." Claire paused for a moment, letting her words sink in. "When I stopped trying to chase a youthful appearance and started focusing on feeling good in my own body, everything changed. My wrinkles became a symbol of all the things I've experienced: love, loss, joy, grief. They tell my story. And once I started embracing that, I realized how much more beautiful I felt." Jessica listened intently, taking in her friend's wisdom. For the first time in a long while, she felt a glimmer of relief. She wasn't sure if she was ready to completely abandon her beauty treatments, but she was beginning to see that the battle against aging didn't have to be fought with needles and creams. She could choose to embrace the natural process of aging, imperfections and all. Over the next few months, Jessica took small steps toward embracing her changing skin. She began by reducing her reliance on cosmetic treatments. Instead of focusing on erasing every wrinkle, she switched to products that nourished her skin: hydrating serums, antioxidants, and oils that emphasized health over perfection. She also spent more time outdoors, letting her skin bask in the sun, with protection, of course. And she started meditating, learning to appreciate her body as it was rather than constantly seeking to reverse the signs of aging. Jessica also began to change the way she viewed beauty. She started reading books and articles about aging that emphasized the beauty of natural changes. She learned that skin naturally loses collagen as we age, leading to wrinkles and sagging. But these changes were a sign of maturity, of wisdom, of a life well lived. Rather than seeing her skin as something that was losing its luster, she began to see it as something that had experienced the full spectrum of life. Her skin was a reflection of her journey, and that, in itself, was beautiful. One day, while getting ready for a dinner party, Jessica caught her reflection in the mirror. For the first time in months, she stopped to really look at herself. Her forehead had lines, her cheeks had lost some fullness, and there was a soft sag along her jawline. But she saw something else in the mirror that day, a woman who had laughed, cried, and loved with all her heart. A woman who had experienced everything that made her who she was. And, for the first time, she smiled at her reflection. She was no longer afraid of the changes in her skin. She was learning to embrace them, knowing they didn't take away from her beauty, they added to it. Tom had always prided himself on his sharp mind. As a lawyer, his ability to think critically, recall case details effortlessly, and communicate effectively had been the cornerstone of his career. For decades, Tom had been known as a quick thinker, someone who could solve problems in real time and keep up with even the most complex legal discussions. His colleagues often admired his sharpness, and clients trusted him to navigate intricate legal matters with precision. As he entered his late 50s, however, Tom began to notice subtle changes in his mental faculties. He found himself searching for words mid-sentence, forgetting details of meetings, and having a harder time recalling names, a sharp contrast to the man he once was. At first, Tom brushed it off. He was busy after all. The demands of his job were relentless, and the stress of managing multiple high-profile cases often left him mentally exhausted. But as time went on, the lapses in memory became more frequent. He started making more mistakes at work, misplacing important documents, sending emails to the wrong clients, and even forgetting deadlines. It wasn't just his memory that seemed off. His cognitive processing didn't feel as sharp as it once did. He found it harder to concentrate during meetings, and his mind would wander even during conversations with clients. Tom's confidence, which had once been unwavering, began to erode. One afternoon, while preparing for a crucial case, Tom found himself rereading a legal brief multiple times. He couldn't seem to grasp the details the way he used to, and it frustrated him. He knew the law. He had mastered it over the years, but now it felt like a foreign language. The thought of losing his mental edge terrified him. He had seen older colleagues struggle with mental decline, and he didn't want to become one of them. He didn't want to become irrelevant in a world that valued sharpness, quick thinking, and the ability to perform under pressure. As the weeks went by, Tom found himself withdrawing from social engagements, avoiding conversations that might expose his lapses. He felt embarrassed when friends would bring up memories he couldn't quite recall or discuss events that he had no recollection of. His frustration grew, and he began to believe the lie that so many people had told him about aging, that as he got older, your mind would inevitably slow down, that the sharpness he had taken for granted would slowly deteriorate, leaving him unable to function at his best. The more he thought about it, the more convinced he became that his best years were behind him, that his career, his mental faculties, and his ability to contribute were all slipping away. But everything changed one morning when Tom met with his mentor, Robert. Robert had been practicing law for over 50 years, and even in his late 70s, he remained one of the most respected attorneys in their firm. Tom had always admired Robert's mind, his ability to recall cases from decades ago, and his relentless work ethic. When Tom sat down with Robert over coffee, he couldn't help but bring up his growing concerns. "Robert," Tom began, his voice tinged with worry, "I think I'm losing it. My memory's not what it used to be. I'm making mistakes, forgetting things. I feel like I'm not as sharp as I was just a few years ago." Robert looked at him thoughtfully, taking a sip of his coffee before responding. "I've heard this story before, Tom," he said, his voice calm and measured. "When I was your age, I thought the same thing. I thought my mind was starting to slip, that I was losing my edge. But you know what? It's all part of the process." Tom frowned. "What do you mean?" "I'm not imagining it, Robert. I'm forgetting things that I shouldn't be forgetting." Robert nodded, acknowledging Tom's frustration. "I understand, but the key is to stop thinking of aging as a decline in your mental capacity. That's the first lie we're told. The idea that as we age, our mental sharpness inevitably fades. That's simply not true. Aging affects different people in different ways, but your mind doesn't have to lose its edge. The trick is to keep challenging it, to keep learning, and stay engaged. Tom was skeptical. But how? I feel like I'm losing my grip. How can I possibly improve my mental sharpness when I can't even remember basic things? Simple, Robert said with a small smile. You're not going to regain your sharpness by sitting back and waiting for things to get better. You got to exercise your brain. Just like you exercise your body, you need to exercise your mind. And you need to do it consistently. The more you engage with new ideas, read, solve problems, and push your mental boundaries, the sharper you'll become. Tom listened carefully, but his doubts still lingered. You mean things like reading books and solving puzzles? Is that really going to make a difference? Robert leaned forward, his gaze steady. It's more than that. You need to embrace new experiences, learn new skills, and keep your brain active. Take up new hobbies. Practice mindfulness and meditation. Stay socially engaged. All of these things challenge your mind in different ways. The brain, like any other muscle, needs to be constantly stimulated to stay strong. That conversation marked the beginning of Tom's journey back to mental clarity. At first, he was hesitant. He wasn't sure that anything could reverse the sense of mental fog he had been experiencing. But he decided to take Robert's advice to heart. He began by challenging himself with new intellectual pursuits, reading books outside of his field, learning a new language, and taking up puzzles that required him to think critically and creatively. He also made an effort to be more present in conversations, actively listening and engaging with others. He reconnected with old friends, not out of a desire to reminisce, but to stimulate his mind through rich, varied conversations. At first, it felt awkward. He had to push through the mental discomfort, but slowly he began to see changes. As the months passed, Tom noticed a difference. His ability to recall information improved. He was no longer struggling to remember details from meetings or family events. He was able to think through complex legal issues with more clarity, and his focus during meetings sharpened. He was even starting to enjoy the process of learning again, something he hadn't felt in years. His sense of mental fog began to lift, and he realized that he hadn't lost his sharpness after all. Instead, he had allowed himself to stop challenging his mind, thinking that aging meant a natural decline. But now, with renewed purpose, he was rediscovering the joy of intellectual engagement. One afternoon, as Tom prepared for another important case, he realized just how far he had come. He could recall the details of the case with ease, something that had been nearly impossible just months earlier. He also found himself savoring the small moments in life. Conversations with his family, time spent with friends, and the satisfaction of solving problems both in and out of the courtroom. He understood now that aging didn't have to mean the slow loss of mental sharpness. It was about staying curious, staying active, and continually pushing your mind to adapt. In the final stages of the case preparation, Tom made a decision. He was going to share his journey with the younger lawyers at his firm. He wanted them to understand that aging didn't have to mean losing their edge. He wanted them to know that they, too, could maintain mental clarity and sharpness by embracing lifelong learning and mental challenges. In a world where so many believed that age meant decline, Tom was proving that age was not an enemy to intelligence. It was a companion to experience. At the firm's annual gathering, Tom stood before a room full of colleagues, both young and old, and shared his story. He talked about the mental challenges he had faced and how he had turned things around by staying mentally engaged. As he spoke, he could see the impact his words were having on the younger generation. They listened intently, absorbing the wisdom he had gained through his own struggles. Tom felt a sense of pride, not just in his recovery, but in the realization that he had broken free from the lie that aging meant mental decline. As the years passed, Tom continued to thrive in his career and personal life. He had learned that his mind didn't have to slow down simply because of age. Instead, he had the power to keep it sharp by constantly challenging it and embracing new experiences. He found that aging wasn't about watching your capabilities fade. It was about learning how to adapt, grow, and keep pushing forward. Tom understood that mental sharpness, like physical health, was something that required attention, effort, and, most importantly, belief. He had overcome the lie that aging meant mental decline, and in doing so, he had not only preserved his sharpness, but had gained a deeper understanding of what it meant to age gracefully.